Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew. I'm Dawn Zoldi, one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co hosts. We've got some great articles today. We're going to be talking about eVTOL trials in New York. We're going to be talking about uh, what is essentially what people are deeming the first drone war in the Ukraine. So, interesting take on that. It definitely has been a boost for drones in terms of battlefield scenarios. We're also going to be talking about San Francisco rolling back its killer robot plan, as it's been called in the press. And then finally, we're going to talk about some new 3D modeling technology. So I see this as a big advancement from photogrammetry, which we've seen with drones. So lots of exciting stuff today, and we've got some great guests to discuss this. We're going to start with Sonet. Sonet, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for the invitation to join your podcast. I am from South Africa. I've been in the drone industry for since 2015. I have a legal background, but I've also been in aviation since 2008, involved in aviation quality, safety, and flight operations management. Sort of fell in love with the idea of drones in 2015 when I did a bit of research and found out more about it and realized how disruptive it's going to be. Since then, I've taken on a drone policy and drone regulatory development sort of role, still assist large companies with their enterprise drone adoption. So I've assisted a couple of the major mining companies in Africa. And yes, still working hard, currently specializing in categorization, which is something we're looking at implementing in South Africa, following in the footsteps of Europe and the UK. And yeah, that's my short intro.
All right, and then we also have Graeme Ritchie. So, Graeme, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Graeme Ritchie. I'm CEO of Shield C-UAS Solutions. I'm also an Air Force officer. My primary job is at UK Space Command. But prior to that, I was heavily involved in counter-UAS, dating back to around similar the 2016, 2017 mark. And really, my previous job was about understanding counter-UAS from a deploy perspective. I was deployed out to Iraq to kind of understand the threat and understand what we could do from a capability perspective to start mitigating those threats. Fast forward a few more years, and we set up Shield Counter-UAS Solutions earlier on this year to primarily provide counter-UAS mitigation solutions to training and FSR engineering support to some of the bigger OEMs in the UK, and now starting to spread it across the globe.
Well, thank you to both for joining us today, and you've definitely brought us some great articles to talk about. So this is going to be an exciting one. Sinet, so tell us a little bit why. Well, I'm excited because this is my hometown, but tell me why you brought up this article.
Yes, so I think UAM, AAM is a very hot topic at the moment. I think especially if we look at the number of airlines that are putting in orders for eVTOLs for that last mile, well, not last mile delivery, but you know, that last little hop from the airport to a vertiport close to the city. This one specifically caught my attention because it speaks about, you know, the concept of learning to fly the eVTOL, which is in this article referred to as a semi-autonomous eVTOL. So learning to fly it in less than an hour and then being able to solo pilot the single seat ultralight with no pilot's license required. So that's basically what caught my attention. Because I think it's yet another disruption that's going to follow from adoption of drones, specifically urban air mobility. So that's what caught my attention at first. Was obviously the whole concept is really great. I also see from the article that they're planning on getting this going by the end of 2023, which is just around the corner. I mean, 12 months fly past as quick as you can before you close your eyes, it's there. And then the other thing I also noticed is sort of, think industry best practice that's emerging is creating these type of corridors over waterways, over railway lines, over big rivers. So yeah, but it's actually the not needing a pilot's license that's interesting for me. Locally in South Africa, we don't have a Part 103 like you guys have in the States, which specifically deals with ultralights. But even for microlights, we still need an NPL, a National Pilot's License. So yes, so it's this concept of you don't need a pilot's license to basically pilot a semi-autonomous eVTOL by yourself. It's a very interesting concept.
Don, you got your hand raised? What's
yeah,
up?
I just want to real quick fill in some facts here, and then we'll get to Graham's thoughts on this piece, because so first of all, the company is Lift Aircraft, and it's their Hexa aircraft. And what they've done is they've partnered with this group called Charm Aviation for an exclusive deal. Charm's buying like 100 Hexa eVTOLs, and the idea is not your normal urban air mobility. I mean, this is purely recreational, right? The idea is, in fact, the analogy they made, this is going to be like segways. Instead of zipping around, seeing the monuments, or seeing, in this case, in New York City, the Statue of Liberty, you can fly around it, right? You can pilot this thing by yourself and fly around the water looking at the Statue of Liberty up close and personal. So I just wanted to kind of add that into the mix to give a little bit more context, and I'd love to hear Graham's thoughts.
Yeah, this is a bit of a strange one. I think from my perspective, the central challenge to eVTOL and unmanned aircraft is essentially mixing unmanned with manned aircraft, or uncrewed with crewed. Now, the challenge behind that is actually giving confidence to, in the UK, the Civil Aviation Authority, or the FAA in the States. I think by doing what they're suggesting, you're actually taking confidence away from that. So, I'm not a big fan of it, if I'm honest. I don't think you can, if you said to a crewed pilot, for example, you're going to have to spend £750,000 and 3 to 4 years learning how to become a pilot, and then overnight you're pretty much there. But all these people that are going to share your airspace don't have to do that. They don't have to spend anything. I don't know. It's a bit of a cultural shift, isn't it? And I think it'd be very challenging to adopt in the short term. But if they can get around those obstacles, then yeah, I'm all for it.
That's an interesting take, because one of the things when I first got into the drone industry that was clear was that manned aviation was not happy about sharing the airspace with these devices. They were concerned, and then also I think projections for how many would be in the air immediately and interfering with flights were probably overblown. But there was also that angle of like, these are going to take your jobs thing, and that was not a reality at that point. It wasn't even a reality that was really on the horizon. eVTOL technology hadn't even made a splash in VC land really at any noticeable scale at that point. But you're right in the sense that this does become a little bit more antagonistic for people who currently do hold the power, or are a stakeholder in the current system. That being said, I mean, I think there is like an inevitability thing, like automating tolls, that at some point there you have to realize something's going to be phased out. But that transition is also something that is still being hotly debated on the ground when you're only dealing with two-dimensional confliction. So yeah, interesting take. Anybody else?
I want to hear Sonet's additional comments, but before we do that, if you don't mind, Graeme, you raise a great point, because and Mike, what you just tagged on, at least drone pilots in the United States and globally have to get a license. I mean, some people criticize the fact that in the U.S. Part 107, you could just study, book study and never have, actually controlled a drone and still get that license. But it's going to take you more than an hour to study and pass that test. I mean, I can almost guarantee that. And to say, you could just be trained on this thing in an hour and good to go. I think that is kind of interesting to say the least. The other thing is, this is another area where I don't know that when the FAA created Part 103 that Sonet mentioned, these ultralight regulations, they were thinking of hot air balloons. Like, they weren't thinking of something like this. And, there's a whole bunch of things that have to be checked. But by the way, for a powered vehicle, which this is, it has to weigh less than 254 pounds. I don't know how much this vehicle weighs, but that you must be a pretty skinny person to fall under that weight class to be able to fly this thing under the current regulations without some kind of waiver, right? Only limited to 5 gallons of fuel. Well, this is going to be electric, so maybe that's, again, where the regulations don't keep up. Maximum speed, not more than 55 knots. Must have a power stall speed of no more than 24 knots. Single occupants only, and has to be exclusively for sport or recreation. Is it sport or recreation if you're making money off of it? Like by definition, that is commercial. Like, in other words, if they're going to charge people money, that doesn't fit into Part 103. And so are we really going to see waivers to allow this in complex, it says Class G airspace. Now you're low level. Now you're flying with drones. I don't know. Sonet, what were you going to say? And I'm sorry I interrupted you there.
No worries. Thank you for those facts, because that puts it into perspective. So just to come back on the pilot's licensing, so locally we also have the remote pilot license, which we're now just changing the name to remote pilot certificate to be aligned with ICAO. But it's the same. It's you have theoretical classes. We do everything from air law to meteorology, and then also a practical skill test before you even allowed to fly a Phantom 4 commercially or for corporate. So that this concept of not needing a pilot's license is very foreign to me. The other thing I wanted to add was, I think obviously we know drones, anything drone is disruptive, and we can find, and I don't want to say, but sometimes it seems like the road of least resistance is to sort of look for the not loopholes, but sort of the gray areas, and try and force drones into that, see if we can get away with it, because it is the problem that the regulations always lag behind. But I think it creates more problems going forward when we try and take, I don't want to call it a shortcut, but a quick step, a quick sideways step to try and use existing regulations to move forward. So you might feel like you're moving forward, but you're actually just giving a one big step sideways, like Graeme said. It's like, now this takes away, because as industry we've said, no, we are confident in our systems and our fail safes and our redundancy systems and all of these things. We're confident in it, to the point where, as industry we're saying, where we are going is an autonomous drone, be it a drone taxi or whatever, that we feel safe enough to put a person or persons in, and the system will transport them from point A to point B. Now, if we're saying no, but actually now we sort of don't need a pilot, but we need someone that's been trained on it to sort of pilot it, I agree with Graeme, it takes away from that confidence, because what are we saying then? Are we not that confident about the systems that we are creating and the fail safes and the redundancy? So I think that's actually a very valid point. So I think as industry we must be very careful to try and take a quick sidestep, thinking we're moving forward, but then actually introducing a whole lot of other issues then, because the regulations, as Dawn said, ultralight was not, when it was written back then, there was no idea of what we're looking at in this article, and I think it's frustrating that the regulations lag behind, but yet we need to work on them then. I think taking side steps to try and maneuver through regulations and interpret things so that it suits us is very dangerous, and I think it actually sends everything backwards. So it was just the additional comments I had.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it seems like the genie's been let out of the bottle twice then. So one by the provider who's saying, oh, we got a trained person in here. But the second is actually further back in history when the FAA allowed, what was it, Part 103 certification for Google Wing was the first one. So like, and if like reading Part 103 and comparing to what that gave Google Wing license to do in testing, it seemed like it's like, well, we trust you, and we know that this is not to the letter of the understanding of this, but of this regulation. But yeah, sure, go ahead. And now, so basically, you have an environment where the interpretation is not exact, rather than them writing new regulation that was actually built to the type of aircraft that we're dealing with. And that creates kind of this second opportunity where it's like, all right, now we're just going to mix things and match things on the regulatory side to see what they'll let us do. Which is, like, it does, I think, to Graham's point, erode confidence. Really great takes on this from everybody. We do have to move on to our next article. Thank you so much, Sonet, for bringing that up. Second one is Graham's show. So Russia and Ukraine are fighting the first full-scale drone war. And, you know, it's not the first time I've heard this. And I think there's a lot behind that. So tell us your take.
Yeah, so I think this is a really strange one. When I was reading it, I was thinking the same. I was thinking, well, this isn't anything new. You know, we've been sort of watching this play out for the last 7-8 months. But there was one particular piece that really caught my eye. And I'm sure you've read it, but there's a piece where they talk about an all-land 10 that's essentially a recce drone that finds its path through the EM spectrum. And it's pretty much on a recce route. Now, what I found really interesting was the Oki teams, otherwise known as in Ukrainian for eyes, were essentially forward observers with drones, small teams of men, observed this all-land 10's route through the EM spectrum. Now, what I thought was fascinating about it was they observed it for a period of time, and then they then retracked that space in the air to then attack the Russians. Now, why that's important is, for me, is because that shows a whole new development of tactics and TTPs and SOPs in the way that we're fighting wars, and it's an entirely new tech war. It's something that I don't think militaries have quite caught up with. You know, I think what we're seeing in Ukraine is just the sheer qualities of mass that are being thrown at each other with little. I'll probably say the Ukrainians are winning the strategic effect war in terms of, you know, they've only got finite amount of resources, and I suppose to a large extent so the Russians, but they seem to be using or gaining effect to a much better extent than, say, the Russians are, because of the way that they're using their tactics and SOPs. So that was just a one piece from there that I found really, really interesting and quite thought-provoking, actually. So I'd be keen to you know, get your take on it.
Sure. Sonet, do you have any feedback on the article?
Yes. Well, first of all, I think the international humanitarian atrocities that are taking place there is quite shocking. I agree with Graham that I think I also saw something else in the news this week where they're saying that now what's happening in Ukraine has now become a bit of a testing lab for all kinds of different military technologies. Drones definitely being at the forefront of that. Yeah, so it's sad actually to see what's happening, because it can't just, we've spent so much time as an industry with the drones for good type of message, that now what's happening in Ukraine, specifically with drone wars happening, is, I think it's sad for me, because we've spent so much time trying to punt the good that can come out of drones, and now we're sitting with this mess. But yeah, as far as the technology changing, I think the counter UAS sort of technology, at least that's also giving that the chance to develop further and to showcase the possibilities, and that it is actually can be done. I think that's also important, and that sort of introduces back a little bit of confidence in this again. But yeah, very interesting article, definitely.
Yeah, and there's. Oh, you want to go, Gary? Go.
Yeah, sorry to cut across there. So I think that's a really valid point, actually. Again, taking confidence away from the market, in so much as people, it's starting to spin the narrative that it's something to be scared about or something to be nervous about, and not, it's probably taken away from those early adopters. But again, just to add to your point about counter UAS, I think that the reason why that's important is because if you do want to run out any UTM networks, being able to secure those networks is going to be so key. Being able to tell the public, yeah, you can get on these eVTOLs, and this logistics infrastructure that we've set up is entirely secure. So whatever payload you've got on your vehicles, it isn't going to be interfered with, isn't going to be stolen, isn't going to get shot out the sky. So I think that the whole what it does is focus the mind on security of that spectrum, if you like.
Mike, you had something?
Yeah, but Graham kind of opened up some new thoughts, which is good.
Sorry.
I mean, general take on technology is you can't control how people use it once it's out there, right? So what you're dealing with here, though, is it currently is at the advantage in terms of how much you can use it before a mitigating force like a counter UAS technology can intercept it, right? I think it has the advantage right now, because if it was truly 100% neutralized for all possible threatening situations, it wouldn't have as much battlefield use, right? Then we would be entirely talking about its productive uses. So that's kind of where we're at right here. Counter UAS is advancing, thankfully, and we've seen some great advancements in the last 2 years. But we don't want to get to a situation where the only resource to take these things out is kinetic, because then that definitely does hamper possible uses back on the home front for the commercial industry, because the security concerns then become the primary concern rather than a thought about just making maintenance, for rare actors. So, Dawn, what do you want to say?
Well, I got a lot to say.
Yeah.
So first of all, on the counter UAS topic, I mean, we're talking, it's really situation dependent, right? So there's not one size fits. I think Graham would even agree with this. There's not one size fits all solution to address these things. And there are very precise, methodologies out there.
Yeah, we saw a lot from Defend this year. That was really
solutions. Cool. Yeah, Defense Solutions got that cyber, enforce there. Just as one example, I know, Graham, you probably have your, others in your repertoire there. So I apologize for not mentioning all of those. But, I want to kind of get away from the counter UAS discussion, because this is the premise of this article is that, war has changed forever. And I think it has, but I also feel like it missed the mark a little bit, because to me, the big difference is this. Like, there's a sentence in here that says, in past conflict, this is a quote, in past conflicts, drones were typically used by one side over largely uncontested airspace to locate and hit targets. Okay, sure. But you know what? This small commercial drone threat has been out there for a while now, right? It's been a tool of choice in the Middle East for terrorist organizations. It's not just been used for ISR. We've seen them dropping grenades on people, exploding over people's heads. I mean, this has been going on for a while.
And a lot of the pace of American regulation has been the result of that knowledge that was going on, right? Yeah.
Exactly. I think the big difference here is this. For the first time that I can remember, and I think if you go back in the annals of military history, you've got civilian companies going outside of normal military channels and working with nonprofits to put basically weapons on the battlefield. Commercial drones that were never built or intended for military use. And I think that's what is kind of crazy and significant here. And, and again, look, people are very, they have a lot of passion about this. They want to do the right thing. They're trying to help. And I think all of that is great. But I mean, I think, Graham, you would appreciate this, right? Being in the Air Force, the law of war was written for a reason. And what really, as an attorney, as a former JAG, what makes me cringe a little bit is this idea that we've now, we've just conflated everything. Like, this dual use concept is crazy, just happening like in an unprecedented way on the battlefield. And this comment here about like there's so many DJI Mavics, quadcopters, out there. Nobody knows if they're friend or foe. Well, what if they're just flying around your neighborhood now? Like, let's bring this home, because that's where the conversation that we just had about eVTOLs and this idea of eroding confidence and, what are we, I think this all kind of combines. It's like a beautiful kind of seamless discussion really from what we just discussed. But I think that's what's significant. Yeah.
I agree, Don. Just one quick thing. I just want to bring the chat in. So we have Abukari Abdul Rafiq. He says, "Hi, this is Rafiq watching you from Ghana. And in Ghana here, we don't have any certified institutions responsible for training people in drone flying. Though it's very difficult to license your drone in the country, it's a new revolution and we are trying to catch up." So just some local context that every place is dealing with drones differently. And final comment, because I think Sonet wanted to say something and I want to pass the mic to her for it. It does seem like drones for good in this conflict, in the urge to help the Ukrainian people, went from a functional drones for good, like we're going to help rescue people who are lost or trapped in a building, to a moralized drones for good, which has led to what Don was saying, is smaller private companies taking commercial use technology into the battlefield in this new kind of weird gray zone type of way. So Sonet, what was your comment?
Thanks, Graeme. I have two comments. I hope I remember them. The first one was this discussion reminded me of a law journal article I read last year, where the discussion was around that there's push to have drones, specifically swarming drones, listed as weapons of mass destruction. So that was a very interesting concept, and there's internationally there's a big push for that, especially when you look at swarming of a number of drones, maybe fitted with munitions, and it's because of the damage and injury that it can inflict. So that's a whole different discussion. And to come back to Dawn, to your comment, so in terms of international humanitarian law, and I think that's what you were thinking in the back of your mind, if a private person is now involved in a conflict, and that's actually the person that's dropping a bomb or something, it goes into a very gray area in terms of war crimes and things like that. And so it's very disruptive, the situation that you just described, where private contractors or private companies are now giving drones, and I don't know if they're involved in flying it and making decisions on that. So a very, very disruptive situation. That was just the two comments I had.
There's a difference between, as you mentioned, Sonet, like the humanitarian purposes, like Dragonfly, right? Sending their drones to deliver blood and critical supplies to the battlefield, right, for humanitarian reasons, versus one that's going to explode over people. And then, some companies are taking the role of training military forces on the use, so again, it's just so interesting that like you said, we've been talking about this, regulations haven't kept up. Neither has TTPs, or neither have TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. On the military side, the law of war is now people are gonna have to step back and say, how do we even address this? Because I don't think it's something we've seen before, and I think that's what makes it really unique.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a great article that kind of also touches on these topics on the other side of the quick break here. Just want to thank our sponsors. So we've got Drone Rescue Systems, Airspace Link, and so sorry.
Tulsa Innovation
Tulsa
Labs.
Innovation is our new one, exactly, and Skydio.
Skydio just popped up. So.
Yep. So. Again, thanks to our sponsors for making this podcast possible. We really appreciate their support. We also appreciate the support of the audience, which has helped build this show month over month. We had a great breakout viral episode last week, so hopefully this one will be another. All right, so back to killer robots, as this article names them. Dawn, why did you bring this up?
Yeah, this is mine. This one fired me up, Mike, because again, the sensationalism. Like, first of all, these are not killer robots. They're teleoperated, so there's humans behind it. These are not autonomous dogs going around shooting people in San Francisco on behalf of the San Francisco PD. But what happened here was San Francisco had decided they were going to allow, in late November, a city's board of supervisors gave local police, quote, the right to kill a criminal suspect using a teleoperated robot should they believe that not acting would endanger members of the public or the police. A little more than a week later, after a bunch of protests, they rolled back that decision that's right now under further review. So the jury is out, okay, public outcry. Lots of concerns here, okay? I'm going to roll through these super quick, and then I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on this. Number one, deciding whether or not to pursue an action to take a life, you need contextual information, context. They're saying this robot will not give the details needed to make that call. Number two, disassociation between decision and action. The human makes a decision, but somehow they're suggesting it's disassociated from the robot taking that action, which I frankly disagree with both of those premises, but love to hear you guys, your thoughts. The third one is, oh, look, we're militarizing the police, making it a military, that's a concern. And last but not least, this is going to harm the police force's ability to interact with the community in other ways. Like robots in hostage situations sometimes are used to deliver phones. So is someone going to pick up that phone? Maybe they'll think the robot's going to shoot them or blow up or something along these lines. So those were kind of the concerns raised. But again, like, I'm going to pass this over to Graeme next. This idea that it's disassociated, this idea that there's not enough information to make a decision. First of all of these situations are highly dynamic and stressful. And humans are probably some of the worst people in those scenarios to remember facts, to identify witnesses, etc. There's research on this. But here's the key. Anybody that's worked in an ops center using a drone knows full well that not only can you see everything pretty dang well, better than just from your naked eye, and especially you have more than one on site, which they will. This will all be networked. It won't be just like one dog. Number two, there's a whole room full of people. So in other words, it's not one cop making this call. There's going to be a lawyer there probably. Like if they do this right, this will have all kinds of protections built in that are not present in a scenario where you have a police officer or two on a scene with a gun that could just as easily shoot somebody.
Yeah.
So Graeme, what do you think?
Yeah, you brought up some great points there. I mean, I'm just trying to sort of unpick all of that. I think my initial gut feeling is a cultural one. The difference between doing that in the UK and doing that in the US. There's in the UK that just wouldn't happen. Everyone would spill their tea. They wouldn't be very pleased.
Well, aren't guns illegal?
Yeah, guns are illegal.
Okay, well,
right?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but you raised a good point in so much as how do you break that? How do you break that apart? In the US, obviously, a policeman is authorized, correct me if I'm wrong, to take life if
use lethal
if
force.
he needs to.
Yes.
Yeah. So, if now you're handing it over to a robot and they can process that information, I suppose it's what you actually turn it into is judge and executioner all within split seconds. I don't know. It doesn't quite sit too comfortably with me. I think what you could do is a mix of the two, i.e. have a policeman on scene with the dog that would be collecting the data and the information that would essentially back up his decision-making cycle. But yeah, I think it all revolves around, you mentioned towards the end there, how that is rolled out. If it's rolled out correctly, then absolutely, I think it's just another tool in the tool bag of the law enforcement.
And just remember, there is a human here in the loop. This is teleoperated. This isn't an autonomous killer robot. That's where the title is wrong. You know, this is no
Right.
different than
Okay.
having a gun in your hand versus having a gun on a dog that you have a remote controller to. That's my position. But Sonet, what do you think?
A
Yeah.
very interesting article. I'd agree with you. The whole killer robot headline is seeking sensation. Um, so similar to drones, I think, you know, obviously drones also have their place, dull, dirty, dangerous type of work. And this is then obviously a very dangerous type of work, law enforcement, especially in the States, where, you know, you have your right to bear arms. And a lot of people are fully using that right to its full extent. So in South Africa, it's the same. We also have the right to own firearms. The police, you know, they are armed. They also have the right to use lethal force in certain situations. So I think I agree with you, Dawn, that if applied correctly, I think there are advantages to be gained. If I just quickly think about um, when you have someone out there in the field that need to make the split decision about, well, it's me or you, so I have to use lethal force to defend myself in a situation where the perpetrator or the other person is armed. I think it takes that subjectivity away and maybe brings a bit more objectivity into the situation, because number one, the person operating that robot is not in harm's way. So I think already it skims a lot of that subjectivity and that, well, let me take you out before you take me out type of situation. And so I think it will actually maybe even lead to less lethal force having to be used. And I think also in that situation, so you said in your operations center, um, uh, it's not one person sitting there. It's a team of people, like you said, potentially similar to drone strikes and stuff. You'll have a legal advisor, you'll have this type of person, and so I think it might actually assist in having laws more uniformly applied. Because we know that because of the subjectivity in one situation, cop A is going to react like this, and in the same situation, cop B was going to react very differently. So yeah, I agree. It comes down to how it's going to be applied and practiced. But yes, I agree with you. It's not, the human's not out of the loop, and so that humaneness is still there. That ability to say, well, let me just wait a bit. It's not a yes or no. I'm going to take out the target like a robot would think. An algorithm will tell you, you know, do it. So yeah, I agree with you. I think the headline is a little bit misleading.
Graham, how your hand back up?
Yeah, Dawn, I actually think, I mean, if the objective is to gain that data and get that information back to an ops room, you know, what's wrong with just carrying a kill cam? Or you know, I think it's the vehicle that they're using here. You know, why a dog? You know, it could just be an ordinary drone. You know, it depends what sort of end state effect that they're trying to achieve. You know, I think it's the whole sort of idea of this zombie attack dog that's gonna kill people. It's probably what this, you know, what they're trying to portray as scary in this scenario.
Yeah, I mean they've got those like crawler robots, right, that look like mini tanks that they're using for
Yeah,
EOD, right, explosive ordnance
yeah,
disposal. It's the same concept, you know, if you put the camera on there and a weapon on there. Just,
yeah,
I agree with you, Graham. I think those dogs are cool. They're headless. They're
yeah,
a little creepy looking, and I think people
yeah,
have this mindset about a dog, just like mentally, you know, like because dogs are used to like attack people, you know, in certain circumstances. So yeah, optics matter. It depends on what this thing looks like. But Mike, go ahead, please. You got to comment on this one.
Yeah, so I do agree to Sinet's point. Is that's actually one of the more eloquent kind of takes on, okay, you're pulling it out of an individual reactive officer's hands. Uh, and the way it was written in terms of this still being a remote controlled drone or robot, yeah, I can see why you guys were leaning towards that, but the issue I have is what's the next step? Are these then used for crowd control? And now you're in a really, really dangerous situation. Secondly, the kind of reasoning behind this was an increase in terrorism, which statistically I'm not sure is actually justified to deploy this technology. I do agree with the point that now you are, if you're using a drone to or robot to deliver a communication device, and the same device can be used to actually kill a target, you're now actually creating confusion for hostage negotiations. And secondly, or thirdly, I'm not sure that the removal of the person in the situation is actually a good result. So you're saying that you have more operational awareness from a robot. That depends on how many robots you're running. I don't think that in a closed corridor situation like we're talking about, that your perception from that robot's camera is actually increased from a human. I think it's probably diminished, and especially if we try to take a next level, like, all right, having a human in the loop, I think is absolutely critical here. I think once you get into using robots with perception, I think you're going to see so much failure because these situations are not controllable, that you'll see that would be a very, very dangerous next evolution. So, and the public gets to speak on this. If they don't want these things, they don't want them. And they spoke. So it seemed like the initial kind of push for this was without public knowledge or consent. So that's why they had to roll it back, because it was a big black eye.
Yeah, I think facts matter. They always matter. And what we see here, just like we see in the counter UAS world, is people making decisions without information. They're coming, right? Because people like, oh, counter UAS, it's so horrible. You're going to be blowing all these, commercial drone pilots out of the sky, or you're going to be taking out people with their pacemakers and shutting down hospitals. Well, okay, you have no clue what you're talking about. Like, get the briefing on the technology and understand what the TTPs are. And then we can talk intelligently about whether this is a good idea or not, because I'll tell you what, and who gets to use it, right? Like, so who gets to use it? Like, what are the rules? Because maybe this is good for SWATs, because the idea behind this was, I think they refer to it as the Mandalay Bay scenario, right? In Las Vegas. That's why Brink Drones created their whole line of effort, was, if there were semi-autonomous or autonomous drones that could have saved people's lives in Las Vegas when that guy was in a window shooting people, right? So they created drones that can knock down doors, that can do all kinds of things. This robot is no different. If you can give someone a tool that can ultimately save lives, as long as it is used correctly, and that is the underscore here. I don't care what you're doing with technology. There's going to be people that misuse it, but if it's used correctly, then this could be, I think, a positive thing. But again, what does that look like? Because not every Tom, Dick, and Harry should have their hands on this and be able to use it. There needs to be approval authorities. There needs to be a chain of command. There needs to be, very strict rules in the United States, rules for the use of force on how this is employed. Sonet.
Thanks. Yes, I think to add on to what both yourself and Graeme said, it comes down to public participation. And I find this is something, and I'm coming back to drones now again, that's something that we sometimes miss. We, within the participants of this podcast now, we know a lot about drones, what it can, what it can't, what it should, what it shouldn't. And so we day to day live in a little bit of a bubble, that we create these things and talk about it and promote it. And we forget that you need public acceptance for any technology to really make a difference in our lives and move forward. And so I find we sometimes run so far ahead, then we remember, oh, by the way, when we want to scale this up, we actually need public acceptance, public participation, all of these things, and then it becomes really difficult. Then you find yourself in a situation where you're trying to validate the technology that you're bringing in.
Yeah, you're in a quagmire.
You're trying to convince,
like a PR quagmire.
Yeah, you're trying to convince people that this is good. And I think if you end up in that situation where now you're on the back foot trying to convince people that it's good and that you've lost round one. So a lesson to be learned is we should actually include public and educate the public right from the onset when we're even thinking about these things, and have them move forward with us instead of streaming ahead and they stay behind.
I want to make one more quick comment, and that's about markings. Because, you know, on the battlefield, you're supposed to mark, right, your equipment, your people. Like Americans are supposed to wear a flag. If you're a Red Cross, if you're medics, you're supposed to have, it's supposed to be white with a red cross. There are universal symbols. Why do we not have those for law enforcement, robots, and drones? In other words, that concern about like, oh, robots rolling out, it's giving a phone, but people might think it. No, that should have a specific marking. Like, you know, this has a specific purpose, and those need to be publicized. And you're right, Sonet, that the public needs to be educated. If you see this marking, this is safe, right? So anyway.
Yeah, but Dawn, how does that help so the person who's in the holding the hostages, like, they need to be educated on what the markings of the drone that's delivering either a death blow or a communication device are?
If you want them to pick up the phone, if that's the concern, like, oh, this creates confusion and you won't even be able to talk to people. But you know what? They don't need phones anymore. They can talk to them through the drone.
Right. The
Anyway.
actual drone. No, I don't know. We could get theoretical in a lot of different ways here, but just to say, Open Robotics was one of the people that protested this at the original council meeting. So they are one of the main developers of the technology. It was really a single vendor that pushed this through in San Francisco. And to Sonet's point, that's not what you want. You want a public discussion so that the protocols for use are specific and worked through in a fashion that's transparent, because otherwise you're not going to get a level of trust or support from the public. And I think that's what happened here. Whereas in Nevada, they had an incident to draw back on, and that's why people felt more comfortable. And same thing with Texas. Sonet, final comment?
Final comment is, it makes me think of a solution looking for a problem. And the moment we use technology in that way, it always seems to blow back. And, you know, if one specific vendor pushes something, oh, there's this great solution that we've just developed, I think it also sometimes fails, because to bring in technology like killer robots, and it's not foreign, we've had lots of movies about it, you really need an entire industry behind it. And then you need, well, not that we can always all agree, but in principle, you need the entire industry behind it, and you need the public behind it for it to actually be. And I think it's a wonderful idea and a wonderful thing. If you can save a law enforcer's life, it's great. But it needs to be done and rolled out properly.
Yeah, I think that's what Brink's success was, actually, that was the path, right? And I think that's where the failure happened here. So anyway, we're going to end on a little bit of a happier note. Very serious episode, but we've had some really serious and great guests to talk about these things, so we want to take advantage of that time. I did let that last article go a little long because I was having such a great discussion with you all. And this is happy, this is simple. So one of the great technologies that drone, like kind of sister technologies that drones have helped proliferate is photogrammetry. Right? Scanning 3D objects simply and fast. But one of the kind of big issues with that is processing time and the amount of images you need to take to make that possible. So NVIDIA has made a great advancement. And in fact, by the time we're talking about this article, just 2 days ago, somebody came up with something that is analogous. So this is not an NVIDIA only technology. The technology is called NeRFs. At least that's the NVIDIA branded version, but this technology with kind of, let's call them little balls of light, is able to really, really fastly map 3D objects and infer space that it actually can't see to help kind of create these 3D models rapidly. And what's so exciting about it is the processing time and the amount of photos you have to take, like, just cuts down significantly. So I'm really excited about this technology because I think it puts the power in the average person's hands. We had one of our early guests talk about capturing heritage sites in the Ukraine and how important that was for preserving our human cultural heritage as well as the local heritage there in a conflict zone where you can't guarantee that those beautiful works of art and human history will make it through. So I think this just takes that to another level, and I'm excited about it. So I've been wanting to bring this up for months, and I finally got to it. I had a spot to. So what does everybody think? Who wants to go first?
Well, can I just fill in a fun fact here? So NeRF is an acronym. It stands for, although it's not a perfectly fitting acronym, Instant Neural Radiance Field, NeRF. And it's using artificial intelligence to basically better cope with all these pain points that photogrammetry has, like gaps from kind of different deflections or occlusions and overlapping elements and shiny
Interpolation,
objects. Like
I believe, is the term.
Yes. So go ahead, Graeme. You had your hand raised.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I mean, unfortunately, my brain goes straight into a war zone and thinking how you could leverage that to best effect. But yeah, I think that sort of capability would be really useful in terms of stitching it all together and making a much bigger picture. Is obviously from a space perspective, we already do quite a lot of this from space. Having that ability to take data from various different capabilities and stitch them all together allows for the user to get a much more rounded picture of whatever target or effect you're trying to achieve. Yeah, really interesting stuff.
Sonet, any thoughts?
Yeah, Dawn's right. Photogrammetry falls short. You can't map in shadow areas. So it'd be interesting to see if this technology takes care of that issue. And yeah, if the technology is that great, it's really great for, in the war situation now, again, like you said, documenting historical sites. I'm also thinking in sort of disaster rescue situations, if you could get an as-is plan as quickly as possible, it's really great. And then just on a side note, seeing NVIDIA, it just reminded me, it's about a couple of weeks ago, I read an article in Drone Industry Insights, and they were listing the top companies in the drone industry. And you would think, right, that it's one of the manufacturers or something, but actually NVIDIA outperformed all the companies, which for me was quite funny because they don't sell drones. They sell the software for it. So that was just interesting to see that.
Yeah, I mean it's a big leap in terms of kind of bridging the gap between hardware and software. What I find interesting, and I'm seeing it elsewhere, and we've covered it a bit here, is a bunch of what people have called AI algorithms, or generally market as AI algorithms, but they're generally just machine learning models. And when they settle on a good model, that is just kind of like the best average way to fix a problem. So like if we have two distant pixels, what's the best average way to interpolate them? And then you just run that over a series of photos. To your point about how well does it work in shadows, this works better in shadows than photogrammetry. But if you don't have light, you don't have information. So it depends on if there's too much light in the photo or not enough light in the photo. That could affect the model's ability to render accurately. So if we go back to even just the photo here, you could kind of see some bumpiness in that. That's where that's coming from. I think the edge of the actual tractor arm, or no, it's the back edge of another tractor. You could kind of see it like with some weird bumpiness. But regardless of that, I mean, just the speed to be able to make a model, you could then refine it from there if you needed to with another algorithm. If you really wanted to kind of get as close to reality as possible. And in terms of a building site, this is awesome because you could get an idea of what's going on with construction at a level that you couldn't do. In fact, would have taken multiple passes with the drone, which now it could probably be one. So I'm excited about it. Don?
Hey, Mike, wasn't it on this show that somebody mentioned, and I forget where, that they were using kind of these 3D models as the quote unquote legal document for purposes of construction and other things. I mean, I think Sonet would agree, like once you start using AI infused models that are kind of interpolating, as you say, information into it as an official legal document, that makes me scratch my head. The other thing I would be concerned about, of course, is cybersecurity and people being able to fill in who knows what into those spaces and maybe screw something up. So you think there's a widget there because that's what you're inspecting, but there's no widget there. And, and that's a key widget. So, I think having the related technologies around this and then working through, okay, what is the reliability level of this particular model then? And from a legal standpoint, should it be considered the official document? Go ahead, Sonet.
Yeah, so I agree with you. So you get different levels of data. So something that's going to be used in a legal document, or for instance, a volumetric report that needs to be signed off for a listed company, there are definitely the levels of data and the accuracy of that is very important. But the mines here sort of use, I saw something the other day from another company where they take daily panoramic views from the drone and they infuse that into sort of a 3D model, and it's only used for planning purposes and for management discussion meetings. So in a meeting now, management can sit and they can see a panoramic view of the pit area from that morning, which really adds value because previously they might have looked at something that was flown, let's say 2 days ago, and then for every hour of flight there's 3 hours of processing, and eventually you get an orthophoto, and eventually you get a PDF sort of pop up on your screen and you can look at it. This is interactive. They can zoom in and out, and it's in construction it's the same. It's to sort of look at your as-is plan versus the production plan to see if you're falling behind or anything like that. But I do agree with you, something like that it can't be used for, I wouldn't use it for legal documentation or for anything that needs to be signed off, like a volumetric report or anything like that. But definitely for planning, yes, it's absolutely great, especially if it fast tracks the processing time.
Yeah, well, that's so it's a matter of resolution at that point because the original photogrammetry is doing interpolation also, right? It's taking 2D images and coming up with a volumetric based on that. So as long as it's sufficiently accurate to what a human eye or photo or LiDAR scan of that object would be, then it'll probably pass legal muster. And the cool thing about this, though, is that it's just so much faster. So if it doesn't make it to the level of being legally sound, it still is going to help with that site scan. Sonet, one last thing, and then we got to bring up some chat comments. I don't want to miss them.
Graeme, do you know if this technology requires ground control points for it to set itself down to be able to create a 3D model?
Oh,
because
no,
that
it doesn't.
Might be... Okay, well then that's fundamental.
What were you saying?
If it doesn't require ground control points, then the technology is fundamental because that is a fundamental of photogrammetry. You need ground control points, which means you still now need to access the site to get those GPS control points down. So that is maybe what's fundamental about this technology then too.
Graeme, you had some comments, sorry.
No. I was just going to respond to that, but yeah, you hit it. It's cool.
All right, so sorry, I lost the chat on my right side, so I'll be reading off my phone. So Christopher Jenseth, Texas did it first, but it's been outlawed here since, so that's talking about robots and drones from our previous segment. You also said this is very cool tech for the VR space. I wonder if this works with different types of sensors, thermal and multispectral. I'm curious actually too. I would imagine thermal might be okay, but multispectral might be weird because you wouldn't be getting depth information. Right, so this can always be verified for traditional means. Yeah, so even if you're pulling the thermal and multispectral, layering it over the model could be helpful too if you don't have time to run the full photogrammetry on a traditional volumetric. So yeah, we're actually on time already. So Dawn, we've got to head out.
Yep.
So we've got some cool stuff coming up this week. What's going on?
Oh boy. Okay. So tomorrow we have a leadership podcast with Dr. Jamie Jacob from Oklahoma State University's Unmanned Systems Research Institute, talking about leading or creating. Leaders create opportunities. It's a great show, so watch it. 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Eastern tomorrow.
Yeah, really
and then
cool, dude.
Wednesday we've got John Everhart from ATA on the Dawn of Drones. Thursday, we're having a big compilation session with a bunch of different industry leaders, kind of a look back on 2022 and a look ahead at 2023 in Clubhouse, 11 a.m. Mountain, 1 p.m. Eastern. So join us. And next week, we've got Don Bershoff from True Weather and Casey. I'm sorry, I don't remember Casey's. I think it's Casey. Airspace Link and True Weather are going to be on the crew next week. So it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and we want to thank Airspace Link, Tulsa Innovation Labs, Drone Rescue Systems, and Skydio for sponsoring this podcast. We also want to thank the audience and their participation. It really makes the show a lot more fun for us, and we appreciate all you've done to help this audience or this show grow. And we also would like to thank our guests, Sonet and Graeme, for their participation today and bringing us some awesome and very thoughtful articles to talk about and for great thoughts to go along with them. So I think that's it for today. We are out here.